Say that again. We good?
Yeah, we're good.
Bob, fix your hair. There we go. Good evening, everyone. This is the Local Comprehensive Planning Committee meeting of February 8, starting at 5:30 or a minute or two after that, as we all get settled. I'll call the meeting to order and read this notice of recording. The meeting will be televised via Xfinity Channel 8 or High Definition Channel 1072. It may also be accessed via Government Access Channel live stream on the Town of Barnstable's website. In accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, the committee must inquire whether anyone is taping this meeting and to please make their presence known. Seeing none, we have no minutes to approve tonight. We will do that at the next meeting. I know that Avery has received minutes and is going through them with fine-tooth combs when she gets them, but we don't have anything to approve tonight, so we'll just keep moving. Yeah. But when you get them. I will. Yes. Okay, so we will move to public comment. We will ask you to come to the lectern, announce your name, and you will have a 3-minute time frame for public comment. So would anyone like to make any public comment tonight? Mr. Tuttle.
Have to make sure the light's on.
And make sure the mic is on, Chuck. Thanks.
The green light is brighter now. Excellent. Good evening. Good evening, and thank you for your service. Thank you for giving your time and energy to Barnstable. And thank you for focusing on our natural resources, their preservation and protection. My name is Chuck Tuttle, longtime Centerville resident. Public interest in protecting Barnstable's natural resources has been heightened by the proposed industrialization of our recreational areas, our village main streets, and siting of industrial energy transfer stations in our wellhead protection areas. Never in our history has such an industrial onslaught been proposed. Never in the history of the town of Barnstable, or of Cape Cod, for that matter, has a contractor proposed to jeopardize our natural resources in such a widespread and dangerous manner. We are all in favor of green energy, but the fact is that there are much more appropriate landfall sites for billions of watts of energy than beneath our residential and recreational areas, even if this industrial invasion is undertaken using the best possible methods. It is highly likely to deliver irreparable damage to our natural resources, especially when the contractor proposes to site hundreds of thousands of gallons of toxic dielectric fluid on top of our single-source aquifer drinking water. The local comprehensive plan that, quote, anticipates and guides development, land use, infrastructure, and resource protection, end quote, needs to be proactive in its protection of what makes Cape Cod livable, our drinking water. This question is complicated and enormously important. I believe that there are a few people here tonight speaking to the same point. Please know that we represent thousands and thousands of Barnstable residents. Our water resources are important enough to require a special focus of the local comprehensive plan committee. Certainly another meeting or 2 or 3 focused on natural resource protection is warranted. Perhaps a subcommittee of the local comprehensive plan committee could assimilate information necessary to help guide the LCP. We are fortunate to have experts in the field of water resources and sole source aquifer protection available to us. Please committee members, make an effort to allow these experts to help you develop a plan to protect Cape Cod's most important natural resource, our drinking water. Thank you.
Anyone else? Hey, Cliff, you have 3 minutes.
Yep, no problem, Wendy. Thank you very much, Chair, Madam Chair. First of all, Cliff Carroll, long-term resident. Actually, I just finished in reference to housing. I'm not talking about housing, but I just completed 7 years on the Board of Directors for Housing Assistance Corp. I'm going to follow up as far as Chuck spoke about quite a bit of what I've was about to speak to, so I'm going to make it quick. In front of you, you have a presentation. It's basically a printout of a PowerPoint presentation previously given. The first picture is just a picture of Wequaca Lake, but obviously saying our sole source aquifer is very important. I'm sure Mr. Gottlieb is going to speak about the sole source aquifer tonight, but I want to make sure we cover the transformer substations in our well fields. Again, I'm going to just breeze through it, but I'd like your attention on this picture. This picture right here is basically a cutout. It's Centerville crossing over to Oak Street, crossing over to the Clay Hill transformer substation proposed for the fire tower on the side of Mid-Cape Highway. Again, very quickly, the large blue area, it's a 28-acre proposed subdivision. It's bigger than the actual plaza that the Kmart Plaza is on. Kmart Plaza is 26 acres. This is 28 acres. It's going to get clear cut. It's also about a half a mile from the town's proposed backup 5 million gallon per day well in the Bridge Street Conservation Area, which is a piece of property that a lot of us around here have tried to protect for years and years and years. This is about a half a mile up gradient from that. The Oak Street transformer is about 90,000 gallons. And then the light blue square to the right is right on the edge of Wequaca Lake. That's the Knights Inn location, which has 125,000 gallons in it and is literally on the edge of Wequaca Lake. I'm not going to make it through these slides. I'm not going to try to. Mr. Council, I appreciate everything you've done for a million years. This diagram right here where we have the red outlined pieces of property. The black square in the middle is the proposed 28-acre transformer substation for the Clay Hill Fire Tower. Every piece of land that has that red outline down and around and below it is actually town of Barnstable conservation land, with the exception over to your lower left of the green dotted land, Mr. Council, it's actually Barnstable Trust land that you helped assemble over the years. And over to our far right, there's a small little one with a red dot on it. That actually belongs to the Barnstable Fire District. That piece of land is planned to have a water tower on it to supply the land if they ever eventually put in that type of well water over there. Directly across the street is the Oak Street transformer, which they're planning on changing to 345 kilovolts and going from the existing 20,000 gallons it contains in oil right now to up to 80,000 gallons of oil. There's been a lot of, the next few pictures, again, you can see this transformer substation. You have Wequaca Lake in the back of it. These are all located, located right all at the top of the aquifer, right at the top of the Sagamore Lens, highest point in town. It's risking our well water. And on the comprehensive end of the subject, we are already running short on supply as we add more housing. We need to protect these wells for our future sources. Without the water, you won't have housing, you won't have everything else that we need. This needs to become part of your comprehensive plan, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. Anyone else?
Should have brought my reading glasses. Pardon me? No, that's, I'll be good. Okay. My name is Heather Swenson, and I am a resident of Centerville, and I live on Wequaquet Lake. As a taxpayer living in Centerville, I'm strongly requesting the Town of Barnstable officials, State of Massachusetts representatives reconsider this wind project location and understand the need to protect Wequaquet Lake. The proposed power project not only affects our beaches, historic neighborhoods, and roadways of Centerville, but could have a direct impact on the lake. I'm not opposed to clean power. However, I believe it has a place for landfall and construction, and that location is not in a residential neighborhood and absolutely not near our waterways. We've put so much time and effort into protecting our lake from fertilizers, doing weed control. Conversations have always been to conserve, protect, prevent contamination of our waters. Residents living around the water sources are scrutinized for every project they do on their property. Yet town officials and Cape protective groups seem to be sitting quiet on this project. Many of the local groups have accepted money from the wind projects. It's almost unbelievable that the town is not putting our waterways first and foremost in their decision-making. Centerville residents simply cannot sit quiet on this proposed project while elected officials and contractors have their eye on financial payouts. I urge you not to sacrifice our lake for the convenience of this project. Our village should not be put in jeopardy for the benefit of a big foreign business. They do not care about the town of Barnstable. All parties involved can claim that they will have all types of measures in place in case of a catastrophic event, including financial reimbursement. But once the event happens, the damage will be done. Our waters and grounds will be polluted to the point of possibly never being clean again. There is no amount of money that can correct that. Not to mention the health risks that could come from a massive electric project and ultimately what it will do to the property values should be considered. I believe it's the town's duty to say, protect our lake, protect our waterways of the Cape, and find an alternative location in landfall and constructions for these power stations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Bob Schulte. I live in Centerville. I'm an advisory member of this committee and have attended either in person or watched all the videos of the LCPC meetings. I have two comments this evening. My first is related to the topic being covered tonight, natural resources. And my second is regarding the results of the first LCPC question issued to the public on what is the best location for new housing. First, as you kick off the natural resources chapter of the LCP, one of the speakers we will hear from later this evening is Andrew Gottlieb, the Executive Director of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. Mr. Gottlieb and the APCC have been very outspoken regarding their concerns about what is arguably the Cape's most important natural resource, its sole source aquifer, which is the drinking water supply for the entire Cape. I applaud them for those efforts. One issue on which Mr. Gottlieb and the APCC have been particularly vocal has been the potential for the contamination of the sole source aquifer by the proposed machine gun range at Joint Base Cape Cod. As I'm sure you all know, over the past 6 months or longer, there have been similar concerns about the potential for the contamination of the Cape's sole source aquifer as a result of an accident or catastrophic event at one of the very large substations being constructed to support Vineyard Wind and the 2 additional offshore wind projects proposed for Barnstable. I'm a member of a group of citizens which has been meeting with town officials regarding these concerns. And I think it's fair to say that all parties agree that while the containment plans proposed by the wind farm developers for the substations will hopefully protect us in the event of a storm or extreme event, they are not designed to protect our sole source aquifer in the event of a catastrophic event, such as an explosion or a fire. Citizens are extremely concerned with these risks, and we call on Mr. Gottlieb, the APCC, and the town in this committee to support a request by citizens for the EPA to conduct a sole source aquifer review for the town of Barnstable on the potential impacts and risks of constructing multiple substations on top of the Cape's drinking water supply. Additionally, due to the extreme importance of this issue, it was suggested to us by town officials that we request this committee to hold a separate meeting open to the public to discuss the impacts of these proposed substation projects on the town's water supply and how they might be addressed in your local comprehensive plan. I am making a request to you tonight to please schedule such a session in the near future. As to my second comment, it was not clear to me from the agenda whether the committee will be discussing the results of the first LCP question submitted to the public later this evening. However, I wanted to make a couple of brief comments. First, I'm not exactly sure why the data and graphs summarizing the responses were segregated into those who provided their names and those who didn't, unless it was because the ones who provided names gave a result more in line with what the planning department wanted to see. But that aside, I'd like to point out in both of the summaries provided to you, the overwhelming choices for the location of new housing were Independence Park industrial areas, along Route 132, and other commercial areas in town. It was not in the existing residential areas, which was actually the choice with the smallest number of votes among all respondents, whether or not they provided their names.
If you could wrap it up, please.
My point, and I believe the survey validates it, is that citizens do not want, and there is no need to eliminate single-family residential zoning in our town in order to address the housing issues. And I ask this committee to resist any calls from our planning department or the consultants it is using to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kate Gulliver. I live in Hyannis, and I'm on the Open Space Committee. As you discuss the current and anticipated needs related to natural resources, I encourage you to pay particular attention to the needs of the village of Hyannis, which, as you state in your 2010 LCP, is the most densely developed of Barnstable's villages. The draft of your natural resources chapter states, quote, "Natural resource planning is critical for ensuring quality of life for humans, including clean air, clean water, and the ability to enjoy the outdoors." There is very little open space in Hyannis, which has the largest population of any of the villages and the largest environmental justice community. Working families, their children, and older adults can greatly benefit from open recreational space in their neighborhoods. Section 7.2.4, page 99 of the 2018 Open Space and Recreation Plan referenced Hyannis parks, including the park at 725 West Main Street, which is now the future site of a sewage pumping station. So it is no longer open space. Another park referenced is the so-called Pocket Park behind the former Stone's Antique site at the junction of South Street and West Main Street, which few residents are even aware of because it's so tiny and it's behind a building and nobody knows it's there. So I don't really think that these two pieces of land should count in your inventory of open space in Hyannis. The natural resources draft states that, quote, "Natural resources planning is critical for ensuring healthy ecosystems for animals, plants, and humans to survive." I think we really have to think about this with the push for housing. None of us can live here without open space, clean water, and space for plants and animals. The town of Barnstable teamed up with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Woods Hole Group on the restoration of Stewart's Creek estuary, and as a resident, I worked with the town on that effort. There is more to be done to protect this fragile natural resource. Currently, the Department of Public Works is reviewing possible funding for a study of the estuary from the culvert of Ocean Avenue to West Main Street. As a member of the Open Space Committee and a resident of Hyannis, I encourage you to protect our natural resources through more open space, particularly in Hyannis, and restoration of critical natural resources, including the Stewart's Creek estuary. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Oh. We have several presentations to get through, so I apologize.
I'll make it short. I am John Towns. I am the current president of the
of BARS, the Barnstable Association for Recreational Shell Fishing. And I'm here to give voice to the recreational shell fishing community within Barnstable, and actually all of Cape Cod, and we have members that are in western part of Massachusetts even. But shell fishing is part of our cultural heritage here, and it needs to be protected, but it's threatened by overdevelopment. Our estuaries, Centerville River, the Three Bays and East Bay, they're polluted beyond belief. There is at least 6 feet of sludge that's a dead zone for shellfish. They cannot live on the bottom. And one of our big things is opposing docks that are being put into shellfish prime areas. And I've been to the Conservation Commission, the Shellfish Committee, and given voice again in opposition to the docks. And because they threaten our native shellfish. People put in docks, and then they'll get a bigger boat, and then at low tide, the boat sits on the seafloor, and it kills any shellfish that are there, and it just keeps promoting the buildup of algae and the sponges there that end up dying because there's no oxygen in there. So, and I've seen it. I could give you show you some movies of it that I've been out there and looking at this. But every dock that's put into our estuaries threatens our native shellfish, and also our rights of access to the public waterways. The public has a right to access the public waters at below the mean low water line, and docks that go out there can go out for 20, 50 feet, and then getting around that. And I don't just shellfish on the shoreline. You can get out there chest deep, but if there's a dock in the way, I mean, they're putting lumber out. They're building like a town out there, if you will. I mean, these docks, whatever, these structures. And one of the things that really sticks in my craw is in this town, you can't even, if you're not a full-time resident, you can't even get a parking pass to the beach. You can't, right? You're not a full-time resident, you can't get a parking pass to go to the beach. So, but yet, part-time residents can put in a full-time dock, which, and they're here in town for 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 6 weeks during the summertime, but the docks are there year-round. It's crazy. Let me see. I've seen docks being permitted into what the town shellfish biologist rates as a 10 out of 10, a perfect shellfish habitat. I'll wrap it right up. And I do speak for the recreational shellfishers, and a lot of I think our shellfish, like commercial shellfishers, and other people that are here tonight, and they make their living out of shellfishing or by shellfishing. The recreational shellfishing, we get paid by quality of life, and we beseech you to help do whatever you can to promote the environment and help clean up the waters, because the estuaries are dying rapidly. That's it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I forgot to say I'm from full-time resident of Cotuit.
Do you have a parking pass? No, just kidding.
I don't have a parking pass, but I do have a canal tunnel permit. I don't know if that counts. My name is Andrew. I'm a longtime, lifelong resident of Marston's Mills. I'm here to comment on all the wind power malarkey. I've been to numerous meetings on the subject, both for and against. I've listened to everything that everybody said. I've listened to all the experts. I myself personally don't give two happy hopping horse muffins about green energy. It's a load of crap. It's a load of snake oil. It always seems to involve large amounts of tax dollars with no promises or guarantees, and it also seems to always include restricting other people's choice on what they will do or don't want to do. I've noticed over time Mr. Gottlieb's group is very passionate about protecting the environment, except when it doesn't seem to suit them. They're very dead set against the machine gun range on Otis, yet somehow that is a greater threat to the environment than the list of things wrong with this wind power crap, which if we were to go through the entire list, we'd probably all be here until the sun came up. None of those questions have ever been answered, nor will Mr. Gottlieb go to any meeting where people have concerns about those and answer any of those concerns. I'd love to see him go on Ed Lambert's show and maybe talk to some of the callers, come in and answer some of those questions. That'd be fun. Long and short of it is, we don't need it, we don't want it. You can ask any number of normal, everyday people, taxpayers, you can ask the fishermen, you can ask members of the Coast Guard, you can ask anybody you want, real people who are not connected with some group, who aren't probably getting dark money. It's amazing how well-funded nonprofits are. And they'll tell you they don't want it, we don't need it. And as I understand it, we're not even going to benefit from it. If I'm not mistaken, a lot of the energy is actually supposed to go to Connecticut. Well, put the damn thing in Connecticut. Get it the hell out of our community. We don't need it, we don't want it. So I'm just here to annoy people that deserve it and smile and wave to everybody. So hope you all have a good night, and I'll go bother somebody else.
Anybody else? We're going to just hold response to public comment. That's okay. I think we'll just hold response to public comment. AJ, you're on this side of the dais, so we'll have our deliberations for sure. I would like to get to the quick overview of what's going to happen next, Kate, and then we were going to hear some presentations. Thanks.
Good evening, Kate Maldonado, Senior Planner, Planning and Development, and welcome as we kick off the Natural Resources chapter. This evening, the main objective of the kickoff of Natural Resources is to get insight and feedback from subject matter experts at both a regional and local level. Quickly, I'll go over just the schedule for this evening, as we have a few other topics, but I'd really like to devote the time. We're very fortunate to have experts here at a local and regional level to give us insight and time for questions and answers as well. So we'll kick off the meeting with a review of the results from the housing chapter survey question. Again, all raw data from that survey is presented online, available with the meeting materials. Before you, we also have a proposed question for natural resources. And really the objective of those survey questions is just to engage our general public, putting it on our website, on our social media, to inform them what chapters, what topics we're talking about, and get some feedback from our public. After we talk about the survey questions, we'll dive into the presentations with questions and opportunities. We're fortunate to have Andy Gottlieb from the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, Executive Director, here this evening, as well as local staff from our Natural Resources Division, Nina Coleman, Amy Croteau, and Chris Nappi. And then at the end of the evening, depending on time, we'll start an initial goal-setting exercise for the Natural Resources chapter. So you'll have a hard copy of the Natural Resources chapter, and it is included with the meeting materials online on the website. So what I thought we could do is really want to take advantage of the insight and the feedback that we get from the experts tonight. So I've pulled out the overarching goals defined in that chapter and have quick bullet points. So we'll walk through those goals per the 6 different categories and say the objective being, is there anything missing? Now that we've heard from the experts, because at the subsequent meeting, the next meeting, February 22nd, we'll do the more in-depth exercise where we really look at the goals and strategies more closely. But I want to take advantage of the feedback this evening to say, are we missing anything before we get to that exercise? So in an interest of time, I'm going to hand it over to Kyle Pedicini, who's our Community and Economic Development Planner.
Wendy, one quick moment.
Megan?
I'm headed out at 6:30 because I have to work at 7. I'm not skulking out
Okay.
because I don't want to be here.
Thank you.
Kyle Pedicini, Community and Economic Development Planner for the town of Barnstable. I'm going to present the housing survey results to you. I'm going to try to make this brief so we can get to the main event of tonight. But as Kate explained, these surveys are really more intended as a public engagement exercise as opposed to like an empirical data analysis. So I'm actually happy to hear that we've gotten some reaction from it from public comment tonight because it's kind of doing its job where it's getting people interested in the process and engaged. So this was the question that we put out to the public. We put it out through e-news and the town's social media pages. And again, this is kind of saying, hey, we're still doing the local comprehensive planning process, and we're now talking about housing. So you might want to pay attention to it and give us your feedback. So this was the question that was posed to the public. We got 345 responses, which is a pretty good number for a quick survey on one topic. So you can see here what the responses were. The reasoning for breaking it up with here, you see the full survey responses, and then we also have responses with names. We did notice in the beginning when we didn't have people require names, we got a lot of people who were voting several times. And you can see that because you got a bunch of the same responses at the same time. So once we actually had people need to put their name on it, we saw, more of a one vote, one person kind of thing. So in case you're interested, these were the results after we required names. But yeah, I'll pause here if you guys want to ask any questions on the housing survey.
So I have a quick question,
Yeah.
Kyle. Are those names published online?
So we did publish the full survey results that did include names, yes. It's a matter of public record.
Is that the only thing that shows there is the name and not contact information?
Correct,
no
yeah,
URL,
we
no
took out the emails.
IP address?
Yeah,
or,
yeah, correct.
Thank you.
I have a question. Okay. Hi, Kyle. So I have a quick question. We've got the housing survey results with names. It shows where we got the results from. But we also did a coalition of, and that may be coming up later, so I'll back off if this is further down the road on what you're talking about, on what the important areas and features, the major concerns were from the people who make up all these response, 170 responses. That was collated as to the hierarchy of things. Is that coming up later? Or?
So are you talking about, we did have some other responses that we compiled and we put on a spreadsheet for people who had kind of answered in the other category. So I'm not sure if that's what you're referencing.
It was on the category of what do you think is the most important issues within our town, the most important concerns. This is where the majority of the responses came from, but are we putting up later with what the townspeople on those responses, what their results were? As it was mentioned in a previous meeting and we went over it, but I didn't know if that was coming up tonight because they said what they thought were the important issues and concerns within the town. I know.
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure what you're referencing. I can look into that and touch base with you offline maybe on it. This was the only question for this one survey that we asked.
Okay.
And then if you'd like me to move on, we have a proposed question for the natural resource section, which actually we took from the Open Space and Recreation Plan update in 2017, 2018, I believe it was. This question was asked. So it's relevant to this discussion now. So we put it to you guys if you're comfortable. This was what we were thinking about putting out to the public for the natural resource section.
So just to reiterate, each chapter will have a one-question survey.
Correct.
And it's meant to be an engagement tool. It's not, we're electing officers here.
Right.
Does anyone have any other suggestions for questions? So I'll just repeat that for the audience members who suggested a ranking of importance rather than just,
That's what the question is.
yeah.
That's exactly what I was speaking of because I know water was very high on that list.
Yeah,
of
so
importance.
for the housing survey question, it was just check all that apply to you. For this one, it's going to be rank, and we'll have weighted scores basically for each answer.
Will there be ability to rank on site?
Yeah.
Is that what you were asking? Is there ability to
Yes.
rank it?
He wants
You'll
it
rank it like
ranked. It'll be
one through
ranked.
5 or something
Okay.
like that, and then
So
we'll
when it's
break
shown
it
on the
down.
website, it'll show them in a way that they can do that. They can actually do a ranking instead of the boxes.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
that was
Yep.
the question.
Great. Anybody else? So I heard a comment from way down back. Maybe add the wind farm to this. We'll take it, we'll take that under consideration. So we're televised, folks. People need to hear what the conversation is. So if you want to come up to the mic, we're not in public comment, but I'll let you come up to the mic and share a comment, an idea, and then we'll keep moving.
It's actually just a quick question. This question specifically is talking about land acquisition, and is land acquisition the only way in which you're addressing protection of natural resources? So maybe the wording of the question could be broader. That was it.
Good point. Thank you. Doug Payson.
Doug Pace, and I serve on the Open Space Committee. Under provide recreational opportunities, I would request that you add passive recreational opportunities in terms of our conservation lands and public open spaces. Thank you.
So noted. We've had a lot of requests for playgrounds, too. A lot of requests. Okay. Well, thank you, Kyle. Look forward to the results of the next survey. When will the next survey be published?
Yeah, we can put it up tomorrow, as soon as tomorrow, if you guys are comfortable with
Let's tweak
what.
it a little bit.
Yep, whenever you're comfortable with
Yeah,
something, we're ready
okay.
to put it up.
Thank you. Okay. I think that leads us to the next item on the agenda, which is Andrew Gottlieb. Am I correct? Mr. Vice Chair? Andrew, introduce yourself, and you have the floor for about 30 minutes.
All right, hopefully I won't need all that. Andrew Gottlieb, the Executive Director of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. Appreciate the invitation to speak to you tonight, to share our perspective on regional issues and how they generally pertain to the town of Barnstable. So we've put out a lot of information in the last year, and I'll start the most recent and work my way back. We annually evaluate water quality through our State of the Waters report, which evaluates and grades public water supply quality, estuarine quality, and freshwater ponds. And the summary of what we found is that in the estuarine world, as was the case last year, 90% of the 53 estuaries, 48 of the 53 estuaries on Cape Cod exhibit poor water quality. That's reflective of nutrient enrichment, largely from inadequately treated wastewater from residential septic systems. Our report was also 90% failure rate last year. All the same ones failed. None got better. And as compared to the 5-year-ago report when we first did this, only 68% of the estuaries failed at that point. So every single south-facing estuary in Cape Cod, all but one down in Woods Hole on the Buzzards Bay side, and all but 4 on the north side, including Barnstable Harbor, exhibit poor water quality at some stations within that water body at some point in the year. And it's all driven by, largely because most of our land use is residential activity. The lion's share of it, 80 to 85%, is excess nitrogen from septic systems, legal, performing to design septic systems are inadequate to address the nutrient reductions needed to provide healthy marine waters. Septic systems do essentially nothing to remove nitrogen from wastewater, And over the decades, we've seen, an increase along with residential development, the number of people, number of septic systems, and it's important to pay attention to, the change in use pattern of existing properties, whereby existing properties are used either for longer periods of time, as there's been a migration of people to the Cape, so conversion of properties that have been developed but lightly used over the years, and increased intensity of use associated with short-term rental. So, you generate a lot more wastewater when there's 12 people in a house for a week than 4. And if you have 10, 12 weeks of that, it adds up. So that is largely attributable, or the decline, further decline in estuarine health is largely attributable to ongoing increased loadings of septic waste into the ground. While this year's report shows at the gross level no significant increase in the number of estuarine resources that are degraded, what it does show is an increase in the number of stations that are degraded. So think about it this way. These estuaries sort of die from the head down. What water quality degrades first at the farthest end, near shore, away from the openings to the embayment, where there's exchange of relatively low nutrient water from Nantucket Sound, Barnstable or Cape Cod Bay, or Buzzards Bay, and degrades as it moves further up. What we've seen in resources that are already degraded is that fewer and fewer stations closer and closer to the opening of the estuaries exhibit good water quality. I gave a talk in Mashpee 4 hours ago. Papaneset Bay, there are no stations that exhibit high water quality anymore, a shared resource between Mashpee and Barnstable. Wacoit Bay has one. And that is fairly typical. So even though, excuse me, even though a number of towns, Barnstable a leader among them, have invested a lot, begun to invest and accelerate existing investments in wastewater infrastructure, there's a time lag. It takes time from the time you authorize these projects for them to get built, and it takes time once they're built to get people connected, and it's only until and unless people connect that you begin to see a reduction of the input of nutrients into the environment. Everything that's in the environment, in the groundwater, has to flush itself through these systems. So there's a legacy impact that even once you stop, you'll continue to see loadings remain relatively high compared to what the resources can handle. So there's a time lag. It doesn't mean the investments aren't worth making, because until and unless you stop adding the nutrient, you're never going to get better. And it doesn't mean that the investments aren't working. There just is a time lag. So towns are in the position of having to make meaningful investments in water quality and wait a little while to see improvement. So that's what we're seeing in the estuarine environment. I think every one of Barnstable's estuaries are impaired to a greater or lesser degree, including Barnstable Harbor and some of the really inshore locations, which surprises a lot of people and really disappointed us last year when that happened. On the pond side, there are 890 freshwater ponds on the Cape. There's not great data for most of them. So the results of our sampling and our analysis limited to about 150 ponds for which there was about 3 years worth of data. That's no older than the oldest of which, the newest of which is no older than 2017. So we need 3 years of data, and it can't be more than 5 years old. Otherwise, you're sort of telling people what something looked like a long time ago or on inadequate data. And for the ponds, about 39%, and that's pretty steady year over year, 39% of the ponds that we look at and have enough data to analyze exhibit poor water quality. That number stays consistent. However, which ponds comprise that 39% changes a lot from year to year. There are a handful of ponds that exhibit problems year after year after year. Some frequent flyers, you can just death and taxes. You know Santuit Pond's going to go green, and it's going to stay that way for much of the summer. Other ponds are kind of marginal. They're under stress, and they're under stress in the exact same thing the estuaries are under stress from, which is residential activity, septics, fertilizers, stormwater runoff. Those are the three boogeymen when it comes to fresh and saltwater water quality on Cape Cod. And more than 50% of the ponds are marginal. They're under stress. And depending upon the local conditions, in any given year, confluence of events might either make that pond go bad or keep it just okay. A lot of the thinking has to do with these heavy rainstorm events that are now, used to be the exception, are now the rule under an altered climate. You have 3, 4, 5-inch rainstorms in a 2-hour period that are pretty common now, but they're not distributed equally. So it can be raining like hell in Centerville and dry on the Yarmouth border, right? And if you hit a pond with a big washout, with a lot of stormwater runoff, a lot of runoff coming off the road, after the fertilizer trucks have been by, you can get a big pulse in that pond and it can tip. Pond on the other end of town, the other end of the Cape, might not have gotten that same rainstorm. It might not have been visited by the fertilizer folks on the same schedule. So we just don't have a great handle on that. The other thing that's contributing to all of this, but particularly in the freshwater world, is increased temperature. It's a warmer world. It's a warmer world and it's a wetter world as a result of it. But cyanobacteria, which is one of the primary drivers of poor water quality in the freshwater world that we're learning a lot more about, are uniquely well suited to outcompete other forms of aquatic life at high temperature. So if you want to grow plants at home, you do two things. You feed them and you put them in a warm environment. And we've done both those things. We locally control the nutrient loading. You can choose wastewater intervention, improve wastewater treatment. You can choose not to fertilize. Town can choose to remove direct discharges of stormwater from these waterways, rely on green infrastructure to take nutrients out of the stormwater before it finds its way into the groundwater. So there's a lot we control on the nutrient load side. We don't control temperature and we don't control rainfall. So, a lot of our thinking and recommendations around this is to control what you can control. And so that's sort of a lot of the counsel that we have around the freshwater world. We're doing some work with both the Cape Cod Commission and our partners at NOAA and EPA to match up actual measured water quality in these ponds with satellite imagery, so that at the same time there's a satellite going overhead, we're out there taking a water sample, and we're trying to draw calibrations between the way the pond looks from the sky and what the water quality sample tells us, so that we can associate those colors with density of cyanobacteria blooms. It allows us to do two things. Allow us to be much more widely cover where we're doing sampling, because we can get an image, look at it and go, these ponds are at risk, these ones aren't. Let's go sample the ones that are at risk and not sample the ones that aren't. That helps, and it also will allow us to answer the question, are things getting worse? Or has it always been like this? And since we've only been looking at cyano for 5 or 6 years, we know what it looked like 5 or 6 years ago, but beyond that, we don't really know. We think it's worse, but if we draw the correlation between cyano blooms and color, we can actually go back to the historic record of satellites over decades and look and see what they said, and it'll give us some insights into what history looked like. So it gives us the ability to understand a little bit how development patterns have changed and how those changes may or may not have impacted water quality. The operating presumption is that it impacts it a lot, right? But so that's where we are on the freshwater world. We are doing sampling on contract with the town of Barnstable again this year on about 35 ponds in Barnstable for cyano, roughly Memorial Day, most of them through Labor Day, a handful a little bit later in the season, depending on which pond it is. Barnstable is the single largest pond cluster that we do in any given town, any of the 15 towns. So we have a fair bit of data, and it's all provided in that State of the Waters report, should you want to dig into that and see what's going on. On the water supply side, It's a substantially different story. There are 21 public water suppliers providing water to customers on Cape Cod. You have the honor of having 5 of them in Barnstable. All of them provide water at the entry to their system that is either good or excellent. And, you know, what we are seeing on the water supply end is that there are no public water supply systems in the year we evaluated, which was 2022 data for our 2023 report, that had exceedances of regulated compounds above state and federal drinking water standards. That said, 10 of the 21 had PFAS below standard in their water. So Massachusetts regulates 6 of roughly 15,000 PFAS compounds in drinking water, which is 6 more than 48 other states do. So of the 6 regulated, nobody's providing water, putting water into the system that exceeded a PFAS number. But it's out there. And it's out there in a couple of cases for very discrete, clear sources, Fire Training Academy being one. You know, a lot of people said different things about the airport. So some open questions about that. Certainly, Joint Base Cape Cod has an enormous PFAS load that has taken out wells in the town of Mashpee and the town of Falmouth already, and for which there's no clear assessment of the amount of PFAS in the water, in the ground, and no containment plan in place yet to maintain it from migrating off base, or if it does migrate off base, catching it and cleaning it up before it enters public water supplies. So the focus then of the analysis we've done on the water side brings us largely to nutrient management, both for fresh and marine waters. It's fair to say that every town in Cape Cod, as part of and a reaction to the county's 208 area-wide water quality plan, focus their nutrient load reduction programs around improving their individual estuaries. And to the extent that mitigation of nutrient loading on a freshwater pond was called for in any of those plans, it was to reduce the nitrogen load that ultimately ended up in the bay, whichever bay, not necessarily to improve the quality of the pond. And there is not a town on the Cape that has a particularly good handle on what the needs of its freshwater resources are for restoration of degraded ones, protection and maintenance of those that are already not degraded. That's kind of the next thing. The county, we at APCC had suggested 2 years ago at the county that it was an appropriate time to begin to look at the freshwater questions. So they launched something called the Freshwater Initiative last year, which is, and we APCC are under contract to the county to do freshwater sampling in 50 representative ponds across the 15 towns to try to get baseline water quality data, help us characterize ponds at a high level, which ones are dominated by external nutrient loading and would benefit immediately from reductions, sewering around those water bodies, which ones are driven by internal recycling of phosphorus and nitrogen in their sediment base that even if you eliminate all the incoming, you'd still have a water quality problem, and to develop a set of recommendations about, depending on which category your pond is, what you would do from a sort of a no regrets management perspective that would put you directionally toward improving the level of protection provided to that pond, even if you don't have a detailed understanding of the exact nature of how much you have to reduce loading the way you do on all the estuaries. So that work is ongoing. We started year 1 last April. We're doing the second of 3 years of sampling this year. That data is being provided from year 1 to the requisite town natural resources agencies in the coming short period, next several weeks, been conveyed by the, will be conveyed by the commission to the towns and will be publicly available, and that's going to be an emerging area. So I think one of the things to really think about is, I know you're spending a lot of money on estuarine restoration through expansion of the sewer system, and we think that's the right way to go. You're going to need to look at your freshwater resources too. And part of that's going to add increasing the sewer area that you need to do. Some of it might provide you the opportunity to look differently at a given layout and trying to get like a twofer, that if you can take load out of an area around a pond that's going to find its way through largely surface waters, run through a river, perhaps in a day from that pond to the estuary, you can get the benefit of the phosphorus reduction in the freshwater resource and the reduction in nutrient and nitrogen loading to those estuaries downstream for the expenditure of the same dollar. And so it might ask towns to begin to think about rethinking a little bit how they're doing. I don't want that to at all come across as a basis upon which to delay ongoing expansion. We are way behind the curve as a broader community on wastewater management. We're still largely in the 18th century, frankly, for most homes that are reliant on septic systems in one form or another. And so, there's no reason to, I don't want it to be interpreted as, oh, we have to stop because we have to look at this. Most of what you're doing, you're going to have to do anyway, and you can probably make some differences around the edges by thinking about freshwater resources differently. The other thing I want to touch base on a little bit is we did two complementary pieces of work. One was this Grow Smart Cape Cod initiative that we did in partnership with the Housing Assistance Corporation a couple years ago, where we were looking for what areas are high priority natural resource habitat areas that, from our perspective, warrant additional protection. What areas are more appropriate for higher density development that, when paired with, and this is a really important point, when paired with wastewater infrastructure, provides the opportunity to both see water quality improvements and provide the treatment capacity needed to support a higher density that would otherwise, if put in without advanced wastewater treatment, further degrade water resources. So we came up with maps for each one of the 15 towns that identify those areas that are highest priority for resource protection, those areas that are appropriate where there's overlap between infrastructure and housing density, and those areas that, if wastewater were extended to them, would become high priority, but are not because the landscape cannot support higher densities without advanced wastewater treatment technology. So we've been working on that and, talking to each one of the 15 towns and came up with a series of town-specific recommendations for regulatory, whether it's zoning or code changes that would facilitate directing development to those areas that can sustain it while focusing people on those areas that are best suited to additional protections. The part of the premise here is we'd like to identify the areas where we shouldn't be fighting with the housing world. In other words, we shouldn't be fighting when there's a high priority contiguous habitat area that's a good place to preserve, and we shouldn't be fighting all density everywhere when it's not going to be on land that is undisturbed, but is underdeveloped, or could benefit from some intensity of redevelopment, given that it's a low priority habitat. So that's a theory behind it. It's kind of sort of worked sometimes. We still fight a bit. That piece of work then led to another report that you can find on our website called Hanging in the Balance. And so the work we did with HAC made us take a hard look at, well, what's left, right? So and what we determined was there's 14% of the land mass of Cape Cod that is both unprotected and undeveloped. And there's a lot of assumptions that people make about that land that reality, ownership, zoning, and building codes don't support. So it doesn't really matter if it's always been green space, unless it's got permanent protections associated with it. Article 97 lands that are publicly owned or lands that are deed restricted in the hands of conservation organizations or CRs in the hand of private landowners, the zoning will tell you what can happen to it. And of that 14% of the Cape, that's about 60,000 acres. 80% of its critical habitat is defined by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And the premise behind the report is we know what the existing development patterns have brought us. Existing development patterns, heavily reliant on single-family detached dwellings, have resulted in lousy water quality, traffic, high housing prices, fragmented landscape, and we step back and say, if that's what the existing pattern got you for how we've handled the existing 86% that's either protected or developed, why would you want to treat the last 14% the same way? And if you choose to treat it that way, why are you going to think you're going to get anything different than what you've already got? And so we've been using the Hanging the Balance report to work on a pilot basis with a number of our land trust partners to come up with, define and implement strategies to enable more aggressive protection of that 14% of critical habitat that requires protection. Some of it is already in municipal hands. Just because it's municipally owned without Article 97 protections doesn't mean it can't be developed. Doesn't mean it can't be repurposed for some other activity. So we're working with land trust to help them figure out within the lands that are publicly owned, the public already spent the money on them. Are they protected? Are the right lands protected? And if they're not protected, what are the methods necessary? And it's different in Barnstable because of your governance forum, but for the other 14 towns, what is the town meeting process and what are the levers that individuals can use to move lands that should be protected in public ownership into the right category? And then similarly to focus land acquisition activities, both are by towns and land trusts to focus on those areas that warrant that additional protection. Do I think all 40,000 of that acres are going to get protected? No. But, a substantial amount of it should be if we want to see some of the benefits of the improvements that we're working to find on water quality by investing in sewer. So a lot of our work on that regard is going to be focused on that. And it's led us to be working in the context of the housing bond bill that the Governor Healy's administration has filed, because we really see some nexus between housing policy and wastewater policy. And part of the argument we've been making is that you can make all the changes in the world you want to the zoning authorizations, but lacking the wastewater infrastructure capacity, those changes are not going to result in different outcomes. And so if you want to see different outcomes, you have to pair those two things and have them work more in tandem, as long as you get a benefit from the water quality investment. So that's kind of the world as we see it at a high level around land use and water resource protection. The simple truth for us is that sort of the original sin, if you will, was the reliance on single-family detached homes on Cape Cod as the land protection methodology. It has done none of those things. And, at the same time, so where it's led us is to focus on how you repurpose that which is already heavily disturbed to be more productive, and how you look at capturing and recapturing affordability of existing housing stock, as opposed to putting all your chips on the table, which some of the people we work with in the housing world have done on a build your way out of it strategy. Quite simply, it is our view that you cannot build your way out of the housing crisis on Cape Cod and have Cape Cod resemble anything like you'd want to be at anymore. No one has put a number on how many additional single-family homes or dwelling units you'd have to have in order to change the market such that there's no longer sufficient pressure on any starter home that might still be there to be McMansionized or to have the development community see adequate profit in smaller homes that have less of a footprint, but it's got to be in the tens of thousands. And we don't view the resources of the Cape as being able to sustain that level of development. So it leads us back to the question of, do we not have enough housing units, or do we not have enough housing units that are readily accessible to the broad spectrum of potential homeowners on the Cape, enhanced by the addition of a new type of housing typology that requires some height and provides an opportunity for people at the either end of the age and income spectrums to have a place to live that doesn't require, care and feeding of an acre of property. And that if you can find that sweet spot, you can deal with a lot of the problem. So a lot of our emphasis around natural resources protection comes from a desire to help set housing policy. And we've commented extensively on this to the Cape Cod Commission through their housing, regional housing plan, is to really emphasize mechanisms that divert money that might otherwise go to production to the acquisition of deed-restricted interest in existing house, and repurpose existing dwellings such that the affordability is built into the deed and that people at range of end of the income spectrum can afford to live there. That type of repurposing has the lightest environmental incremental footprint, because you're just repurposing what's already there. And if you add wastewater infrastructure, you can minimize the impact of those homes and the year-round nature of those homes from further impacting water resources. So we're putting a lot of effort, and I think it's something that's worth thinking about as you think through your plan on the relative weights and value of providing more housing stock to meet the needs of your community and not get sucked down the road by the siren song of production, because there's another way. And we haven't heard any discussion of effective methods to take that which is put into production and prevent the market forces that have distorted the rest of the housing market from sucking those in and having them behave in the same economic fashion as the diverse universe of individual housing. So I don't know how long I talk, but I'll stop.
No, that was good. Probably have a couple of questions from people on the dais, but one quick question, Andrew. The deed restrictions of existing houses that would attain affordability, how long does that take? Has anyone done any analysis of?
I can't answer your question directly, Wendy. I think that we've been pushing this as a policy priority through the commission's work. The bigger impediment that we see is that it's no one's job to do it. Whose responsibility is it in the town of Barnstable, the town of Mashpee, Barnstable County, to obtain an affordability and retain the affordability stake in existing dwellings? They have, similar program, Vail, Colorado, deals with a lot of the same issues that we do. They're bounded by mountains, but it functions as the ocean too, right? Same thing. And, they have an agency whose job it is to acquire deed-restricted interests in housing to maintain long-term affordability. And, they do, I don't know how effective it is. They do more of it than we do, because somebody shows up at work every day and it's their job to figure that out. We lack that on Cape Cod. What we lack is a bunch of inadequate tools that are sort of rooted in the existing system that we have that's led us to where we are. And we're trying to tweak it, throw a lot more money at it, but so what? It's not, I haven't heard anything that makes me feel any better other than investing in maintaining affordability makes me feel any better about the strategies that are out there.
Thanks. Okay, who would like to ask questions? Mark?
Thank you. Just a question. Do you think that a transition from overburdened private septic systems, let's say for the majority of, there's probably a good portion of the Cape that rents. I'm talking full-time rentals, not short-term, but moving to areas where there is infrastructure, where there can be density. Do you think that would that have to be significant in order to have an effect? I mean, I think there are a lot of the dwellings that have more than, they have heavy loads, obviously more people living in them than should be.
It's really hard. I think it's treacherous and basically impossible to get into the business as a municipality of regulating intensity of use. You can put it on the books. Ability to enforce it is pretty limited. So I think where you have relatively dense single-family, rented or owned, owner occupied, those are probably going to be pretty good areas for sewer extension. The denser, vertical, affordable, whether it's market rate, affordable, but it's small, so it is affordable, or subsidized capital A affordable, are almost always going to have to be on infrastructure. There's no particular on-site system that could allow you to have any type of multifamily density that relies on septic systems.
So there are no real emerging technologies currently that you believe that would be able to do that on a private level, just a single family?
So on the single family side, there's promising technology that has meaningful reductions from existing load numbers. As a rough cut example, the average south-facing estuary, of which Barnstable has, half a dozen, can handle about 3 milligrams per liter of nitrogen before going belly up. Most of the current alternative nitrogen-reducing septic systems get you a credit down to 19 from somewhere in the 40s. So big difference. Big difference from 45 to 19. You're still a long way from 3. The emerging technologies that are being piloted now, from what I'm hearing, get you into the high single digits, some indication that they're getting into the mid-single digits. That gets you a lot closer. So, as yet, unless you want to do a composting toilet, an incinerating toilet, or a urine diversion in your home, there isn't anything that competes with municipal collection and treatment and a disposal outside the watershed in many instances that gets you down to the level that a lot of these water bodies are going to need. Some of these estuaries, and you have a handful that are in this category, Mashpee we do too, need 100% removal of existing loads in order to get better. Any on-site system has some residual. And so, by definition, they get you closer to the water quality target, but I haven't seen the magic bullet on-site yet.
Okay. And just as a matter of time, I just had one last question. So it sounds like when you're speaking that the majority of this comes down to funding, that they're just, these projects are extremely expensive and or need to be heavily subsidized. Do you think the focus of a town should be to identify funding sources, alternative outside of just property taxes that can be sustainable moving forward in order to fund these? Do you think that needs to be a focus where money may, in fact, speed up the correction or the ability to improve infrastructure?
I'll answer it this way. The ability to effectively, in a reasonable time period, which is a generational time period, requires a lot of money and a lot of conscious forethought by each town on how it wants to structure a financing plan. There are 15 different towns, and there are probably 20 different approaches in those 15 towns to financing it. Some towns put a lot of them on betterments. Some towns put none on betterments, put it all on tax rate. Some towns reserve their meals tax, short-term rental tax, other discretionary non-property tax-based funds, funnel it into infrastructure. Others put it entirely on the tax base. And I would say the only thing that we would preach to a town is not how to do it, but they need to think through the financing plan and they need to make some conscious, hard choices about the need to prioritize wastewater finance over other stuff. And what that other stuff is going to be highly variable by community, but it's not going to happen by accident. The other thing I'll just point out, because as Wendy knows, once you get me talking about wastewater money, I can talk your face off. There are tools available to Cape Cod towns for financing wastewater that are unavailable to the other 336 municipalities in Massachusetts. Prevalence of zero-interest loans from the state, primarily focused around Cape Cod. Not exclusive, but it's designed for us. Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund doesn't exist anywhere else in the Commonwealth. The existence of the Water Infrastructure Fund, the WIFs, statewide, but used more on Cape Cod than anywhere else. The ability to dedicate meals and lodging taxes was a big boon that a lot of towns, Barnstable included, segregated out and dedicated towards infrastructure. So you had something, some towns just kind of let it go up into the ether in their general operating budget, and they have nothing to show for it. That was a mistake. So as these tools that the governor has proposed come, whether they come to bear or not, but if they do, towns really need to think about, are we going to put that into our general operating budget and have it disappear, or are we going to dedicate it towards this priority item and put ourselves in a position of not having to ask for every last nickel to come from the property tax base?
Good question, Mark.
Thank you.
Asia.
So you mentioned a lot of very interesting things. Thank you so much for your presentation. I actually really loved it. It gave me a lot of information. So this is a three-part question, but the first part is, if we eliminated septic systems completely, wouldn't that make it so that the water quality stays good? And can't we get private developers who are trying to build in our region to take money from the project that they're trying to develop if it has multiple housing units and say that they have to pay for the sewer in that neighborhood?
So
Something of
the predicate to your question, if you got rid of all the septic system waste and had, high-level advanced wastewater treatment, you would see radical improvements in water quality across the board.
Okay.
That said, the Cape as a whole, you probably can get away with about half the septic systems on the Cape remaining if you target the infrastructure and the treatment and collection around the highest priority areas that are providing the greatest load. So some towns, only really one, Chatham, and Provincetown's inching this way, have decided to sewer the whole town. Not because they need to sewer the whole town to meet water quality objectives. They actually overprotect, which is great. Less nutrients in the environment's a great thing. But because the community wanted it, and it made their choice of financing more equitable in the eyes of the people who are making the decision. So they're doing a plan that has them pretty much doing everything. Whether they will or not by the end of the day, I don't know. They might not. But other towns, again, depending on which estuarine watershed you're in, you might have to get it all out. So that's part of it. So more treatment's good than less. The idea about how you engage your development community in contributing is really going to be variable based on the community. It's one conversation if they're building proximate to an existing sewer line, or they can provide the resources to tie a neighborhood that you might otherwise want to get in. That's a valuable asset for them to work with you on to negotiate contribution. That might advance your program. In other instances, they might be putting something in a place that is low priority for you, in which case, you'd want to have them do more advanced. And the technology around small facilities being able to achieve lower levels of reduction is getting better. The permit standard's 10. That's not good enough. A lot of the new municipal facilities can get you down to 3, which is what you need. Mashpee's is going to be at 3. Orleans is already at 3. So that's kind of the standard you build to. Whether the individual development can get there or not, a little bit questionable. A good strategy is to, if it can't, have that development pick up existing septic systems on the fringes of it so that you're ending up with a net reduction. even if the treatment milligram per liter load is higher than you might want. If you're treating enough of an existing load, you can bring it down below the base. So there's a number of different strategies to work with the development community on.
Thank you.
Okay, Lindsay.
In your experience, have you seen any, Barnstable is one of those communities that's going to have a mixed setup. Coastal embayments, planning for that. We have large areas of town that are going to be left out of that system that have ponds.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen in your experience that perhaps cluster systems in those areas for pond water quality, or perhaps some of these in-pond treatments that are being proposed now, would be successful in these isolated areas?
Yeah, I mean, so something's better than nothing, and it's hard to get people to pay twice. So if you're going to do one of these middling steps, you need to do the analysis to understand whether you're reducing enough load to make a difference. Because it's really hard if you say, we're going to do a package plan, publicly owned, at this one location here, and then all of a sudden find, well, it didn't actually do the trick. Why didn't it do the trick? Well, maybe it didn't do the trick because you still had a lot of stormwater runoff from private properties as well as municipal storm drains that you didn't deal with. So deal with that. What's that load look like? What does the internal recycling of phosphorus in that pond look like? Is there a big phosphorus load in the sediments and it's turning over every year because the pond's losing oxygen because you get the warm layers and you get the stratification of top layers from the bottom layers? You need to, before you start to make those kind of decisions, you need to probably really understand what's driving quality in that particular lake. The premise that less is better is true, but it might not be enough given the specific. And like I said, asking people to pay twice is a tough ask. I mean, the one thing people can do today that costs nobody anything, just stop fertilizing your lawns.
Yes.
Right? It's not going to solve the problem.
You just got to cut the grass.
Well, if you don't fertilize it so much, it's not going to grow so
That's what
fast.
I'm saying.
But, it's not going to solve the problem. It might keep a pond that's marginal from going bad on a given year, but it costs you actually less than nothing. It saves you money. You're not buying the stuff. You're not paying somebody to put it down. You're not paying somebody, in most cases, to come cut the grass that they spurred to grow when they put the fertilizer down in the first place. So if you want to start something today around your pond, decide that you're just going to let your lawn go, buy some seed of white clover, let a little bit of moss grow in the lawn, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
On that note, we good for this part of the presentation?
Well, now you're talking my language. No fertilizer, no pesticides. Let the little animals grow, and maybe they'll help eat some of the stuff in the pond. And I'm sorry to do this to you, Andrew, but there's a small elephant in the room, and it would be great to hear from you if you have a point of view in terms of some of the wind farm stuff and the potential impact on our water.
I mean, we have a very well-formed view of it, and it's in writing. It's available on our site. When we commented extensively on the project, we look for certain types of mitigation that, especially around, spill prevention that, goes well above what's in place for all other like and similar facilities that exist already on the Cape. And, we found that the mitigation was appropriate and commented to that effect. So there's no lack of clarity on what we think, and we have not shied away from saying it.
Okay, we have some other experts to get to, and I'd like to do that now. I'm just going to keep moving. There's snacks on the table over there if anyone feels like they're going to go ahead first. Please take a snack. And Kate, you're going to tee us up with our next. Thank you, Andrew. That was sobering and interesting. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nina Coleman. I'm the Director of Natural Resources here in the town of Barnstable. And with me tonight is Chris Nappi, who is our Fisheries and Wildlife Specialist for the town of Barnstable, and Amy Croteau, who is our Shellfish Constable. And we're going to talk about our natural resource program. It's a little different than what's in your chapter, and I want to just take a minute to talk about what our programs are and what we do before we kind of dive into the resources that we love and protect, and also maybe some suggestions about what we'd like to see in the next 10 years. So, natural resources, there's two arms of the Marine Environmental Affairs Department. One arm is Harbor Master, and the other arm is Natural Resources. So we are a division. Within our division, we have 4 programs: Shellfish, Natural Resources, Sandy Neck, which is an enterprise account, and Animal Control. So what are we responsible for? So the topics that we own, if there's an issue, the town comes to us, is all things shellfish, all things Sandy Neck. We are foremost enforcement officers for environmental laws and regulations. We are in charge of and manage the herring runs in town. We deal with the hunting and freshwater fishing in our town. We deal with all domestic animal control issues, wildlife issues, and we are completely involved with the endangered species protection in this town, which we're going to get into. Things that we dabble in, overlap in, are many of the topics that have already been discussed this evening. Water quality issues obviously affect many of our topics, and we're drawn in as experts to talk about that when issues come up. Open space management, this is definitely something that is confused with a lot of residents. Our conservation areas and our open space are managed by the Conservation Commission and other departments. Our role in these open space areas is enforcement. So we're the ones out there patrolling for ATV use, illegal trails, obviously hunting and other activities that occur in our open space. Lakes and ponds management, obviously we have a role there. Wetlands regulation, stormwater management, particularly when it's involved in areas near shellfish beds, and groundwater protection. So with that, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Chris Nappi.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Chris Nappi. I'm a Senior Natural Resource Officer here for the town. And so I'd just like to give the group here just a little bit about my perspective about what I see in my short time here working for the town. So I've been an employee and a natural resource officer for 12 years. And in that time, I get the opportunity to be out in all of these natural areas in town and see what's happening on a day-to-day basis, right? And so obviously the town is a destination because of its diverse natural resources. And there's just in these 2 pictures that I have in these slides, it's 2 very different estuaries, right? We have such a variety. It's the north side, Barnstable Harbor, with 12-foot tides. And then we have the south side, that's East Bay there, with 3-foot tides. So obviously, with those drastic differences, there comes a different way to manage it and, different things that can occur in those places. So, and then we have all of the people that come here to enjoy all those different opportunities that come along with that. And so what have I seen in my time here? Degrading water quality, which Mr. Gottlieb, he probably provided you with a lot more information that I'll give much more eloquently than I will as well. Take a good listen to the points that he had to say, because I'll probably have a very similar viewpoint on many of those points, particularly when it comes to water quality and critical habitat protection. I've also seen an increase in harmful algal blooms. That's in both fresh and salt water. We have, as he said, cyanobacteria blooms, and then algal blooms that are impacting our shellfish habitats. We're seeing loss of fishing and swimming opportunities due to these harmful algal blooms, which impacts a lot of recreation. And we're seeing loss of habitat both in coastal areas and in upland areas. And I think we need to take a real important look at upland habitat protection. The coastal areas and areas around wetlands do have a layer of protection, but there are also critical upland habitats that maybe people don't look at as critical, but in my experience being out there on a day-to-day basis and seeing them, they're actually not under municipal protection even though the town owns them, so they can be developed, and I think we need to take a look at those spots and actually provide them with an equal level of protection. And so, next, yeah, back one more. Yeah, it's okay. And so we're also seeing, because of this development, we're seeing an increase in the impacts of coastal storms. Just within the past month, we had 9 inches of rain in January. And along with that, we had, a lot of shoreline erosion, and then 9 inches of rain, definitely some of that is making it into our waterways, right? So doing a better job of treating that water. And I can say that there are projects that are aimed at doing that, but we need to do better. Okay, thank you. So what can we do? Comprehensive evaluation of undeveloped municipal and private properties, both upland, freshwater wetlands, and coastal wetlands. And we can determine their importance based on that, and then do thoughtful projects in those areas where development is needed to provide benefit for all residents, both human and non-human, right? The town should be, and that's what I say, and those thoughtful projects we're actually starting to. And so a big part of my job is herring run restoration projects, and then just kind of the general maintenance and operation of those herring runs. And so we have 5 herring runs in town, which I'll show on my next slide. And we do have a number of projects in all of those, which is good. Some of them are almost ready to be implemented, and some of them are still in the planning stage. But it's a step in the right direction. And then we also need to do, as I said, wetland and upland preservation. We need to take a look at these areas and provide them an extra level of protection. And then also bog restoration. Cranberry bogs restoration of cranberry bogs that are underutilized or not utilized can be important areas that could help with stormwater retention and also the effects of climate change. So I think moving forward, it's a good idea to provide natural resources with a spot at the table when decisions are made in terms of land acquisition. Because we have the specific knowledge of these critical areas, we have important input to provide. And so I know that there was a comprehensive plan that I was just really kind of made aware of from 2010, which was kind of shocking to me that I didn't even, I had a faint idea of what it was, but I just, it wasn't really referenced in our day-to-day stuff, which was kind of eye-opening that I was asked to, provide some information to this panel. So I think, and in that plan, there were wildlife corridors and watershed corridors that were mapped out in that plan. And I think that some of the language that's in that previous plan is important, and it's still relevant today. And a lot of those things just need to be implemented. So it's a good reference point for you all, that the implementation of some of these previous points are a good thing to moving forward. So here's just a brief slide that gives you a map of just the herring runs that we have in town. So we have 5 active herring runs, and I just wanted to give a little bit of education if the panel wasn't aware. And so they span across the villages. And like I said, we have a number of projects associated with these herring runs, and they're aimed at, providing the herring improved access to their spawning areas. And because we have such a variety of them, there's really a strong potential for them to, really flourish here. And herring is just one, and I bring them up because they're just one species that would lend to the increase in biodiversity that we could be reaching for, and that's an important part of the health of the environment in this town. And so what are we doing? We also have some projects that get the community involved in osprey nest pole installations. Maybe some of you have seen them out and around town, and they're new poles that get popped up, and we put them in town property, and we put them in particular areas where we know that there's conflicts with man-made infrastructure, and it helps mitigate those impacts. It's a really easy thing for us to do, and it's a good project for the town. And like I said, they promote biodiversity, which contributes to ecosystem resilience, enabling natural systems to adapt and recover from the environmental pressures and disturbances. And so the other project on the right, that's Mill Pond in West Barnstable. We're involved with the Division of Marine Fisheries with stocking herring in that pond. It was a historic herring run, which was actually not a herring run for a number of years because the population died. So we talked with the Division of Marine Fisheries and with a number of locals from West Barnstable, got together and convinced them to start this stocking project. And we're in year 3 of that project, and we're hopeful that it will be successful. So thank you. That's my part.
Hi. Can everyone hear me? All right. Okay. My name is Amy Croteau. I am a senior natural resource officer and shellfish constable here in town. I started my employment with the town back in April of 2006, so I'm starting my 18th season. But I also was born down the street at Cape Cod Hospital circa 1980, so I not only have a view of the changes in our local environment throughout my tenure with the town, in my capacity, my position, but I also have the benefit of having grown up and recreated and played in a lot of the areas that I now strive to preserve and to protect. My specialty is shellfish, and there are a number of ways in which shellfish play a part in our local community. Through our municipal program is shellfish propagation. In the state of Massachusetts, any coastal community is charged with having a propagation program if they can to help bolster the natural populations of shellfish and also to help feed the general public. It's an important food source to humans. Recreational shellfishing in Barnstable is renowned across the Commonwealth. We've seen a steady increase in the amount of permits sold and the amount of people showing up each tide to harvest from our waters. Since 2010, which was the last time that a local comprehensive plan was put in place, our quahog production has increased from around 800,000 quahogs per year to 3 to 4 million quahogs per year. Our oyster propagation has increased from around 650,000 oysters grown per year to a little over 1 million oysters grown per year. We're charged with doing shellfish habitat assessments, which look at every embayment within this town and designate areas of high shellfish value. Those assessments are to be used when looking at coastal projects that are proposed to weigh against, the importance of the habitat. They've been completed for 3 bays, East Bay and the Centerville River, Hyannis, and Barnstable Harbor since 2010. Most recently, 3 bays and Barnstable Harbor were completed over the past few years, but the 2023 assessments of those areas have not yet been adopted by the Conservation Commission. Our propagation with quahogs starts off with very small seed. We buy them for, seed availability reasons and for price point reasons. Very small, typically around 1 millimeter. We grow them in floating upwellers where they're given lots of extra nutrients and oxygen through the upwelling system until they're about the size of an M&M. And then we plant them out in the field under predator exclusion nets that we maintain for a little over 2 years. And then we dig them all up and relay them all over town. One change that I've seen in my tenure is that when I started off as a seasonal employee in the propagation program, we were able to plant nets of baby quahogs basically anywhere we wanted to. And the unfortunate reality now is we have just a handful of nursery sites that are suitable for putting that small seed under nets, and now rely on those nursery areas because of habitat degradation to grow those quahogs to a size that are field plant ready, which is more labor intensive. Oysters, we grow in 2 different ways, either by remote set, where young oysters will settle on mother shells. You can see a picture of an oyster, the second picture, that has a bunch of tiny baby oysters attached to it, so we call spat. And then those mother shells are grown out in trays, broken up into individuals, and then cast to the bottom to harden up for eventual consumption. But we also buy from our local growers, sometimes seed and sometimes legal stock that's ready for planting, because we do believe in giving some of our money back to our local blue economy. Continued shellfish propagation challenges, current and continuing, water quality, habitat degradation, nutrient loading, more frequent adverse weather events, ocean acidification, sea level rise, nuisance species that are endemic to the region, invasive species that are popping up and proliferating, continued additions of moorings, docks, and piers, change what we're able to do, what numbers we can produce, and where we're able to grow shellfish. You can see on the left a picture of a map from August 25th, 2019, that show areas closed to shellfishing. And then you can see on the right a picture from July 1st, 2003, a little less than 4 years later, of around the same summer season, areas closed within 3 bays to shellfishing. There's been an increase of approximately 310 moorings added to the town of Barnstable waters since the year 2000. In the year 2019, the National Shellfish Sanitation Program made changes to its model ordinance, which in very layman's terms, because shellfish terms can just be daunting if you're not familiar with the fishery, is about an 800-page document that dictates how all shellfish harvesting and handling is conducted across the country. They made permanent rule changes to shellfish areas in proximity to mooring area closures, mooring areas. And now when I have a mooring area as defined that has more than 20 boats in it for the summer season, I have to close that area to shellfishing until there are less than 20 boats in that area, which typically is not until after the beginning of November. Approvals of docks, piers, and other coastal projects have continued at a steady pace over time, even in areas designated as high-value shellfish habitat. I don't have the exact numbers, but if you go to the Cape Cod Commission's website and check out all of the old historical maps of the area, you can count and you can see that there's a steady increase of those types of structures within our embayments. Marinas that leave boats in water year-round, whether they're being used or not, results in those shellfish areas being designated as prohibited, meaning that no shellfishing will ever be allowed in those areas again. Changes in water quality have caused some areas to change from open status to conditionally approved, subject to seasonal closures. There's a small portion in the Narrows, the Cotuit Narrows, that you can see that was open in August of 2019 and is now subject to a seasonal closure June 15th to October 1st, water quality pending. And it's almost like you can sort of see the water quality issues from that watershed leaching into Cotuit Bay. We also have aquaculture. The town has 72 individual aquaculture sites encompassing approximately 156 acres between Barnstable Harbor and 3 bays. Our blue economy are amongst the top 3 producers of oysters and quahogs in the state of Massachusetts every year. So congratulations to our growers for doing an excellent job. Up top is a picture of the aquaculture zone in Barnstable Harbor. Off to the bottom right is one site that we have permitted off of Bone Hill Road, also in Barnstable Harbor. And then in the left are all of our aquaculture sites that are privately leased in 3 bays. Since 2010, aquaculture operations are more managed by the Natural Resources Division through the employment of an aquaculture specialist. When aquaculture first took off, it was largely unregulated because it was sort of a pet pilot project to save failing commercial fisheries, and nobody was really expecting that it would gain the traction, popularity, and notoriety that it has now today. Responsibility for tagging of gear and for retrieval of gear that goes rogue has increased over those years that we've had a dedicated specialist, not only showing that management helps, but also shows that there's an investment of growers locally to say, yes, aquaculture is good for the environment, but we do understand that sometimes things go missing, but we understand our responsibility for those missing things. Regulations pertaining to aquaculture have and are still being formulated to evolve with the industry. In this town, most of our aquaculture regulations were developed in the 90s when I was in middle school, and are not indicative of what aquaculture is today in this town. It's a long and often challenging project, but we make headway with it every year. And pertaining to private aquaculture, back in 2016, we did promote a 208 plan bookend in the form of seasonal nurseries in North Bay amongst the 6 growers that exist within Cotuit and West Bay, but it was never formally adopted. So where do we go from here? In a perfect world, this is like a young me child's wish list. Protection of shellfish and other marine species habitat should be paramount. We're beyond the tipping point and cannot wait for the effects of townwide sewer to address this. Action is needed now. Shellfish are in our impaired embayments. Shellfish do nitrogen remediation and nutrient uptake. It's quantifiable in the amount of meats that are removed, but it's modest and it's localized and can only do so much, but it is a way to mitigate nutrient loading while we wait for the full effects of sewer to take place. Eelgrass monitoring of existing eelgrass beds in town should continue, and efforts to bolster protection of such beds should be implemented. I have here a picture of the eelgrass monitoring that we do. We check on our existing beds yearly. We've been doing it for close to a decade now, just to monitor the health of them throughout the year. And then below them, of course, scallops, because without eelgrass, you don't have any of those. I believe an evaluation of moorings and their effects on habitat townwide should be conducted to see if a moratorium is necessary. When those changes to the model ordinance took place, Division of Marine Fisheries told me that our town would be the first to be audited by FDA because we have more moorings in this town than any other municipality in the Commonwealth. So we would be the first to be audited when those changes took place. I think an evaluation of docks and piers townwide should be conducted to see if a moratorium on future developments is necessary. I think there's place for personal responsibility of property owners who can directly impact our salt and freshwater bodies with choices of septic, landscaping maintenance, and that should be explored, not only for people who live directly on the shoreline, but for people who are contributing to those watersheds. And I think there are opportunities that have to be revisited or explored for the first time in 3 bays in Popponesset Bay, because there's only so much that municipal propagation to do, and the benefits of continual removal of shellfish to market by private aquaculture is quantifiable in nitrogen credits. Thank you.
All right, and then moving on to Sandy Neck, which is also the Sandy Neck Park Manager. I didn't really get into how long I've been with this town, but I've been with the town for 20 years. Most of that time was as Sandy Neck Park Manager, and then more recently, I got the additional duties of the Director of Natural Resources. So we all love and know Sandy Neck. It's a regionally significant property that has extreme value and attributes and is really the jewel, in my opinion, of our town. It has a lot of resiliency baked into the cake because it is not developed for the most part. And we have a number of accomplishments that have occurred since our 2010 project 2010 plan that I want to highlight. I've been personally involved with a 23-year invasive species removal program on Sandy Neck. And at this point, we've got a number of species under control. So we're kind of holding Sandy Neck in a old Cape Cod time, not just in terms of development, but also in terms of the plant ecology. So that's exciting. And we have a number of endangered species protection programs that have been very successful. Kind of want to highlight our diamondback terrapin program, which is well beloved in this town. When I started as a park manager, we started actively managing the terrapins and really getting into our Head Start program. And if you see these terrapins in our schools being raised by our community, we also started capping nests to improve survivorship. And you can see there from the graph, when we started about 20 years ago, we were running around 100 female turtles nesting per season, and now we're at 400. So that's an example of a system that is got a lot of resiliency, a lot of opportunity for management that has a lot of results. As I mentioned, we have an educational outreach program. A big part of that is our diamondback terrapin program, but we also do quite a bit of outreach throughout the town, both at Sandy Neck and through our natural resource department. We had secured a habitat conservation plan, which is actually in your draft. So a habitat conservation plan would take me quite a bit of time to explain, but the synopsis of it is that it's a state and federal permit that allows us, in the Sandy Neck case, to deter piping plovers within a small section of our beach to allow that off-road vehicle use to continue. And we've been able to have our beach open without any closures for the last 3 years because of this permit. Actually, I think it's been more than that. And in exchange, what that's doing is it's increasing our revenue, which is what we feed back into our Sandy Neck Enterprise account for all of these important programs, our outreach, and also to fund our capital improvement projects. So the biggest project ahead of us at Sandy Neck is to deal with the effects of climate change. We have a lot of infrastructure that's right on the edge of our shoreline. The picture on the left is when we became perilously close to losing our parking lot after one of our storms. So we really need to, and we're working towards pulling that infrastructure back away from the shoreline. Fortunately, we have a place to go with that. And then the second part of the project is to look to nature to help us create a more resilient primary dune in front of the parking lot, which is also something that I would recommend for our south side beaches. As staff has mentioned, we're seeing pretty extreme storms on the south side, pretty eye-opening in habitat loss, and a lot of our public beaches need to be looked at for ways to use nature to inform us how we can buffer those systems and make them more resilient. The other thing I want to talk about, and one of the main things I've done for this town, is manage our piping plover population. This is an asset. We have one of the top plover populations in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You can see from that map, those are all locations of nesting areas, in many of those cases multiple nests. So we have them not just on Sandy Neck, but also on the south side. Piping plovers are heavily managed and heavily protected, and they're slowly creeping up in numbers. So you can see that graph is Sandy Neck. There's just a slow, gradual increase at Sandy Neck. This year we had a record number of piping plover nests. We had 57, which is really remarkable, and it goes back to our habitat conservation plan, where we're able to really protect and improve that population while still providing recreational opportunities. And that's really the balancing act there. So having done this for 20 years, we're seeing statewide, and my other colleagues that manage other beaches, we're seeing piping plover numbers slowly creeping up. We're seeing a decrease in nesting habitat due to storms, so all those erosion events are taking away plover habitat, so these plovers are ending up in some very odd places nesting. There's more human pressure from development and from recreational opportunities on our shoreline, and so we kind of see this slow train wreck of this future conflict, which is actually already playing out, where we want to still maintain access for the public to the beach. We still want to maintain, what makes Cape Cod and why we're here is to be able to get to the water, but we still need to protect those birds. So I've started this project with permitting. Essentially, we need to really look at permitting. We need to make compromises, and we need to do some planning on how we're going to address this population and still be able to achieve what we want to achieve on our shorelines. So hopefully I can read this. So we had a lot to say, but I wanted to sum it up if I could just take one more minute to sort of sum up the bullet points of what staff and I were brainstorming about when we were given this chore. What would it be if it was up to you, what would you do in the next 10 years is kind of how I framed it, right? So this was our brainstorming. Is accomplish the Sandy Neck Beach Park Coastal Resiliency Project, which is well on its way. We're doing quite well. Use natural solutions to improve resiliency to our public beaches and waste to water. Evaluate proactive planning and permitting to protect endangered species habitat while still providing recreational opportunities to the public. Maximize the ecological health of the town's herring runs. Focus on protection and restoration of the town's open space wildlife corridors and sensitive habitats. Protect the town's remaining eelgrass beds. Explore opportunities to increase aquaculture on the south side. Consider moratoriums on new docks and moorings while a study is conducted that evaluates the effects of these structures on shellfish habitat. Natural Resource Division becoming more involved at the planning level of development and land acquisition. Evaluate mechanisms for shellfish habitat protection. And then consider regulations that place more responsibility on property owners regarding environmentally sound practices, ecological landscaping, reduced lawns, vegetated buffer zones and wildlife corridors, fertilizer bans, and irrigation restrictions. So we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Avery.
Where are those eelgrass beds?
I was going to ask, how many eelgrass beds do we really have?
So we have existing eelgrass beds that span from sort of the outside jetty of Calmus as you exit Hyannis Harbor, around the inside of Calmus and Nantucket Sound, and then along SD Avenue. And then we do still have some spotty sections of eelgrass outside the Cotuit Bay Cut that extends out toward Oregon Beach. We looked at historic areas as well to see where there may be, pieces of eelgrass still present. We haven't found any there yet.
I had a question regarding the study for moorings. Would that include looking at the moorings? I know it's been talked about before for helical versus chain. And what else might that include? Would you looking at why these areas can't be used for seating and the discharges from the boats while they're mooring? Is that an issue?
Well, we do see an increase in discharges from boats, especially in the high season, that often are difficult to trace back to a vessel at the time that we're witnessing it. In well-established mooring areas, they essentially become sort of deposition muck puddles. If you were to dive the mooring area outside of Cordwood Landing as it overlooks to Cotuit Oyster Company, you hit sludge after, 4 feet or so, and it becomes very difficult to even see and find the bottom. In the eelgrass beds that we monitor outside of SD Avenue, you can see where use of helical anchors may actually help protect the eelgrass because there are scours around all the areas where like mushroom anchors are used. So I think all of those things would be things that I would encourage having looked at.
I just want to say this was a lot of really, really interesting information. Will we be receiving a copy of your presentation?
We'd be happy to share
That would
that.
be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Kate's shaking her head, yes. Asia?
So great presentation. As someone who's not originally from the Cape, who's grown up in cities most of her life, I was a little confused at the beginning, but thank you for explaining what a mooring and things like that were to someone like me who's allergic to shellfish. Yeah, I think that they should be protected. I think that would it be something that we should consider eliminating all docks like that we have in current existence? I feel like with a problem this severe, we should be eliminating fertilizer tomorrow on town council and putting out so that we have no more new docks to protect the water. Then we can build.
There is still in existence an overlay that put a moratorium of new docks and piers in Cotuit Bay only, but I think that is something because of the amount of docks and piers that have proliferated in recent decades would be worthy of looking at. There's not much you can do for the structures that are existing, with the exception of perhaps requesting they allow us to do propagation suspended from the bottoms of them seasonally.
Susan?
I have another question that I was just reminded of. I think that Falmouth has done something about fertilizers. Are you familiar with that? And whether it has had any effect?
I do live in Falmouth. I don't fertilize, so I'm not familiar with any bans because I would never do it to begin with.
Maybe it was a voluntary thing, yeah.
It might be, I'm not sure. I think a lot of the problems for towns that do have fertilizer bans is who enforces it,
The town of Barnstable has a fertilizer regulation. So we're hearing from the audience that there is a regulation in the town of Barnstable on fertilizer.
Yeah, there's a regulation within a buffer zone of a watershed. Yep, that is correct. Enforcement is extremely challenging.
Fran?
I just wanted to say Cotuit is certainly bore the brunt of moorings. We have moorings popping out of Cotuit Harbor, and it's just not a problem with the moorings, it's a problem with all the people who come into the village to either launch their boats or use their boats that are on moorings. And it's a two-edged sword. It's producing, pollution from cars and people, but it's also just, it's impossible to get around inside. The Cotuit Mosquito Yacht Club has problems, running their races in the harbor because of all the moorings out there that are in the way. It's really gotten out of hand. We aren't the only harbor in Cotuit, in Barnstable.
I have a question. In the winter, I have a view of the Great Marsh, and I've noticed after 45 years, more and more flooding. Do you track how often the marsh floods now, the Great Marsh?
Yeah, that's the Great Marsh, largest marsh on Cape Cod, second largest marsh in Massachusetts, and an extremely healthy system is flooding. We've had a little respite this year. Everything's been coming out of the south this year, but we've had some really extreme flooding events. The Sandy Neck Gatehouse has flooded twice. The water's been going right up into the dunes. There's a those were cyclone bombs, I think, both of those. But there's also other factors, obviously, sea level rise, climate change. One of those events was unfortunate because the marsh had flooded, froze, and then another big tide came in, and there was nowhere for that volume to be taken up. But a big concern, and we're seeing like Route 6A flood, and the fire chief, West Barnstable fire chief, has said he's never seen it like that before. So, even in my 20 years, which is just a blink of time, I'm seeing a huge change to our storms and the effect on our environment.
I have another question. Sorry, Avery. Dumping on open space, does that fall into your enforcement regulations or duties?
Yes, it does. So we do enforcement regarding those activities, and we do surveillance in areas that we know are common dumping locations. It's difficult to catch the people that do it, but yeah, we're out there. That's one of our tasks for sure.
Follow-up question. Do you mind, Madam Clerk? No. So it seems to me, has there been, and we don't have to have a long answer now, but I'd like to find out, has there been some kind of a plan with the transfer station? I don't know, we used to call it the dump when I was a kid. Is there any thought about giving people free dump days that we could just direct them to get rid of their stuff there instead of throwing it on the side of the road? I mean, I used to manage a property that had chronic dumping going. I'd have my little old ladies out there cleaning up dead cats, so it's just, you see a lot of stuff, right? But it just seems to me like that's been going on for years and years and years, and there's got to be has anyone ever sat down and had a conversation with?
It is a perpetual thing that we deal with. Yeah, it's not just a seasonal issue. That would be a conversation that we could have with the transfer station, but it would really be up to them, and it would be, because they're taking all of that, right? Yeah, so.
Wendy?
Avery?
Phragmites.
Really? A Phragmites question?
I know you love them, Nina. I know you've eradicated them on Sandy Neck, but they're not eradicated around Barnstable Harbor. I don't think they can be.
I think, so Phragmites is common reed with a fluffy head, really, really, really tall. It's actually all connected underneath, so it's one plant, right? So you gotta get all of it, or it's useless because it's going to translocate energy and pop back up. Sandy Neck, back in the day, I was able to catch it at the beginning of an invasion. So it was a piece here, and it was as a result of the flooding from Hurricane Bob and the perfect storm for those of us that remember those storms. So I was able to catch it within 10 years of that and kind of be at the leading edge of the fire, if you will. But driving down 6A, there's a lot of Phragmites, and I think we're past the point. I really do, because it would just, the only way to eradicate it in that setting is a whole lot of herbicide, and I don't think that's appropriate. It is pulling nitrogen out. You uncut, you got me going, but it is pulling nitrogen out of the system. There's some communities that harvest it and then pull that out, similar to shellfish, where they're actually drawing nitrogen out of the system. But I think it's really too far gone. We need to catch areas that are freshly invaded and focus on those.
Fascinating. Cheryl, did you have a question?
No, I had a comment to your free dump day suggestion. I like the idea, but I also see it as problematic. I know that, transfer station. Because the prices have gone up so much over the last few years for that, you have a lot of people who are backing out. If you had a free dump day, what I would foresee for that is that some people will say, well, I'll just, have it for a whole month and then come and bring it in, which is going to overload the, yeah, you see what I mean? I like the idea, but I unless it's one day every 3 months or something.
Maybe an income-based one?
Say
Maybe
what?
based off of income, because if you can't afford it, based off of your income, make it so that everyone has access, and maybe they won't dump. I live on Independence, and right where I'm at on Independence is near the nature preserve, and I walk up behind where I live at, and I see all of these sofas, mattresses, all of that right on my walking trail, which we're not even allowed to use because there's so much crap there.
Perhaps another thing that might want to be looked at and reassessed. I just imagine, I do have a sticker for it. I know it costs a fortune. And the lines are already pretty long, but if you had one day and it was monthly, I think the lines would be a lot longer.
Maybe I'll work on that in retirement. Okay. Is there anything else that we want to talk about? So you have a wish list of your properties, your upland properties. You have that wish list of, in a perfect world, money was no object. These are the properties we would protect, upland.
We certainly can work on that. We've never been asked that, but we'd be happy to pull that together. Yep, and I think the APCC's work on this topic is really timely, and we certainly would start there.
Great, thank you. Yes. Hold on.
Super short one. Just to say, fantastic and very informative presentation. I'll look forward to receiving that information. Nina, you had mentioned about a moratorium being needed, and one of the reasons for that is because this would be one of the earlier areas to be audited. I think that goes in line with also what was brought up with the wind project, and that where it was suggested and requested a review on the impact. So maybe put the two of them together, an impact review on that particular item, and also that would include the moratorium on the other areas as well. Just a suggestion.
Thank you. Kathy. Thank you, Nina. Just have a quick public comment here. Your mic.
Okay, I'm sorry the mic was not on. So Kathy
That's okay.
Ledeck, 3 quick points. Fabulous presentation. There are 3 points that I'd like to make about this. First of all, on fertilizers, Town of Orleans is moving ahead on something.
Yeah.
Should look at that. With respect to the 4 bullet points at the bottom, it says fertilizer bans. I would suggest that you consider adding pesticide bans. And in parentheses, you could pursue, if you wish to do this, I'm not sure I support it, but integrated pest management. And then as a leader on Cape Cod, the town of Barnstable should implement these 4 bullet points effective immediately. They should serve as a leader to show everyone else that they're doing it, and we as private property owners should copy them. They should monitor and collect data and report on their success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we are about 15 minutes beyond our target end time, so last chance for the committee. Fran? Come on up, Kate.
You can do pest management just by some pests, but just feeding the birds year-round, which I do. I don't have any bugs in my house. And I wanted to say about the shellfishing, when I grew up in Cotuit, there were probably only 900 people in the village at that time, back in the dark ages. And there were many people, the parents of the children I went to school with, who the only reason they had food on the table was because their fathers were shellfishing.
That's right.
And so, and I'm sure that's going on today. And so it's very important that we protect all of that.
Thank you.
Can I make one?
All right, Avery.
I want to thank you for bringing up again the irrigation restrictions. This is something that I think we have to really address throughout this plan. There's so many ways. I feel like we don't hear enough about it, and I think it's one of the most egregious uses of our drinking water that I know of.
Okay. Cheryl.
Another quickie. With regard to the pesticide issue, also, I would think that would have to be clearly identified. So with 2 particular areas, we have a lot of people have dogs. This is a high tick area, and which is quite dangerous for dogs. So something where pesticide for ticks things, but also we also have a swarm issue, and unfortunately, I am a victim of that. having been attacked by a swarm, as was my 2 doors over neighbor.
Of bees?
Swarm of bees, 64 stings, where they stopped counting and said, can we just say multiple? And it was the same with the gardener from my owner 2 doors over. And I was told that this is when I left the hospital, we have a huge swarm problem. But I now wipe out the nest if I see them, because I get the 25-foot spray and then run inside. But I wouldn't have to go closer than that or be outside. I would just suggest it be looked at a little more closely. Thanks.
I think everything that gets suggested gets a hard look. Anybody else? Okay. Kate, take us home.
Okay, thank you. First and foremost, thank you to our subject matter experts. We've really appreciated it. I think we've had such a robust dialogue and so informative tonight. In an interest of time, I think that what I may do, I did want to work through the goals, but we will be doing that at the next meeting. So I may ask that the committee review the goals and the strategies after this presentation. Certainly, Nina, Chris, and Amy's presentation will be added to Laserfiche promptly. We can incorporate all of these great suggestions, strategies that they've presented before you, but I would ask the committee, and I can send out an email tomorrow, that if you have any further, basically our ask is, there's any buckets of information, any goal strategies missing after what we've heard this evening, in it beyond the incorporation of what we've heard from MEA tonight. So I'll send around an email on that. I did want to know, I heard a few members of the public asking where the survey question will be located, and that'll be available on the project website. That's barnstablelcp.com, and we'll push through our social media channels as soon as possible to spread the word on that as well. And I can give the direct link to the committee tomorrow.
Thank you. So I just assume that a lot of the ideas we heard tonight aren't going to tie into our draft local comp plan, because it's literally around land use. So ideas about a free dump day don't land there.
Yeah, we can definitely, we've been incorporating everything and sorting everything to
Make
the
sure people don't panic about
appropriate chapters, and our consultants were here tonight as well to hear the issues and opportunities by the subject matter experts, and they'll be incorporating that into an updated version of the natural resources. So everything's to be evolved, and certainly going out to the public with the draft chapters too.
Great, thank you. So is there any general correspondence?
Excuse me, Wendy, may I ask a question?
Sure, absolutely.
Excuse me. Just a comment on the question that's going to go out. One of the speakers mentioned, somebody mentioned, was it just about land acquisition? And so my thought was, if we left out the land acquisition and just said, what would people like the town to focus its resources on, that would cover land acquisition, but also a lot of other things as well.
Open it up to the committee.
I think it's a good suggestion.
Agreed. I don't think preservation should be like our sole focus.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I think we were going to tweak we were going to add land acquisition, not just preclude the other.
I think there's a comment to add passive recreation, and I have my notes in front of me, but we'll make sure to incorporate the comments.
I think there's a difference between what the town might acquire and what other private nonprofits may acquire or help us acquire to protect. So maybe there's a little refinement there. Are you going to eat? Well, we can't mess around with open meeting law. I was going to say, if we have other ideas for questions, we should send them to you.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, and thinking about future chapters too. I think this survey question has served its purpose, engaging the public.
Right.
And so we can.
It's non-binding, but it's illuminating.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there's no general correspondence for the committee, and our next meeting is in 2 weeks, right? So February 22nd, we're going to double up meetings this month and next month, and then in April, we're going back out to the community with our findings. So stay tuned for if we might double up in May or June as well, and just keep moving here. Any motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
We had public comment already.
Yeah. So I moved public comment to the beginning.